I am Doug Winter, and I am the baseline is I'm a general contractor, mainly a residential builder in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I have multiple licenses and multiple certifications and a bunch of complicated history that's really a result of my being interested. And I find learning and studying a pleasure, so it's meant that I've been able to accumulate a lot of paper credential around me. And I'm trying hard to be retired. I really should be done with the active part of it, but I find that I have clients who know me to be honest and direct and competent and so on and so forth. And I've always built crew and context around projects. So I've been a project-based contractor rather than a business-based contractor. So it's relatively easy, or it's aligns well with my history to put together a team for a particular project. And my clients all know these things and trust me. So I've had a little more trouble letting go than I expected, but here I am. I also got very interested in the well, the cooperative model, I guess is the shortest way to say it. And my partner is a choreographer, put together a evening work around a piece of music that was written for the Camino de Santiago, that path across northern Spain, Catholic pilgrimage. And we eventually decided that we probably ought to do it, that is, to do this walk, if we were going to take that particular piece of work seriously. So we did. And it starts in northeastern Spain, which is the same difference as, I guess, southwestern France, which is the Basque Country. And it's a mountainous region, and it's almost impossible, if you're paying any kind of attention, to not run into the Mondragon people, the folks who work in and around this collection of cooperatives. And it wasn't why we were there, so I didn't really bear down on it, but at the time I sort of registered that there was something interesting happening there. And the whole walk across Spain was a very, I'll say entertaining, but a little disconcerting series of accidents and events that were all about my history going back to my very early performing days. I mean, it was complicated. It was a German writer who had me, I mean, it's so weird, me from 35 years ago, 40 years ago, on a tape on his computer. He was dragging around his laptop, and there I was, big as life as a performer. I met a fellow who had been doing genealogies, and he knew about my great grandfather, and he shared my last name. It was a strange 5 weeks. It was a strange 5 weeks, and the thing I took away from this, when I got back to the Bay Area, I knew that there was Arizmendi-ish things happening, the bakeries and a variety of operations that were shared the name at the very least. So I sniffed around a little bit, and lo and behold, there was a builders cooperative, also called Arizmendi, that was, I didn't know it at the time, but it was really on its last legs. I wound up being able to, or being of use, helping them gracefully retire, I think is the way to put it. So I wound up closing several projects, one of which is still staggering along. In fact, it's got a couple more weeks, I think, to go. But they were struggling, and while I found them very simpatico, I liked the players. It wasn't able to maintain itself. So I have since started doing a little more personal research, let's say, and trying to figure out why cooperatives have not played a more major role in my trade, in my craft, which is to say why the builder cooperatives are really small kind of garage operations. And I'm not sure I'm right, but at least part of it is truly cultural. I think a cooperative practice requires cooperative people. And I think as a culture, we Americans are not cooperative by our long-term training and by our short-term inclination. We're not cooperative. Honesty is about as close as we come to it, calling things by their right name and trying to be directly honest. But cooperative is something else, I think. And I don't see it functioning in our culture. And I think it's the biggest reason why we haven't got viable, sizable cooperatives that matter. Now, I could be mismeasuring, and I'll continue my sniffing around, but I don't see it. I'll keep looking. I also think there's something about the early generation of the cooperatives in Spain in particular. They came out of serious depression, serious adversity, serious poverty, frankly. And that's not the nature of the beast now. I think the next couple of decades we'll see some changes in this regard in our world, in the American experience. And I suspect that the cooperative model will have more to offer, or people will think it has more to offer. They'll see it in their economic as well as their emotional interest to follow that up a little bit. I think I'm now 73. I don't think I'm going to live to see it, but that doesn't make it less interesting to me. I think it's very interesting. I tried to, this is probably 25 years ago, I had a C corporation, a California corporation, that I tried to make a cooperative of departments. So each department under this C corporation was attempted to make it independent, or at least self-starting, under its own controls. A little different than cooperative. In other words, it followed the economic synergy, theoretically, but it didn't really fix the problem, the emotional problem, the basic training we all have as late capitalist participants for being protective of our power, protective of our economics, regarding everything as zero sum, at least in the economic aspect. I think was a worthy attempt, and it meant I was dealing with people who were more interesting than the average tradesperson to me, but it didn't really succeed because it didn't attack the fundamental issue.
Had you divided your corporation, when you say you divided it into departments, was this by trades, like
Yes.
Plumbing, electrical?
Yes, okay. Yes. And one of the requirements, I can't say it was really a requirement, because some of the trades were not licensed, but the idea was to each carry an individual license. I wound up, I now carry 4 licenses, partly as a result of, I like to read, I like to study, I like to test, I like all that stuff. I like being put under scrutiny and under a certain amount of pressure. I thrive under it. It's part of the reason why the bulk of my real activity right now is as an expert witness. I think it's useful to me to be put under pressure. In any event, back to the point, this was by license, or at least by specific trade. Most of us were licensed. There was an electrician, there was a painter. I carried the plumbing license, and I had a B license at the time. There was a concrete guy who was licensed, like that. And I have since become much more, I think, sophisticated and aggressive about what I would regard as requirements of a cooperative model. So it would mean a relatively low minimum wage, maybe a minimum wage for everybody, including management, and and profit sharing as part of ownership. There are models for this stuff that I really think it's a mistake to reinvent the wheel. I think Mondragon and those operations have very clear philosophical and mechanical models for these things. So reinventing the wheel is, I think, a loser's game, particularly in my case. But keeping the actual remuneration very low and very even more aggressive. I think Mondragon is like a 6-to-1 now. I think that's how they do it. The range between the lowest paid and the highest paid folks in their organizations is 6-to-1. I'd be more aggressive and actually make it 1-to-1 and just everybody's paid the same by the hour. I think it's a more interesting question about how to evaluate performance. But I'm, of course, getting way ahead of myself. There ain't no such organization to.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you mentioned that there's you see it as a cultural aspect. And I know from having interviewed John Curl and other people in your generation too, that in the 70s, there was successful, a mechanics co-op, some of the stuff attached to the co-op grocery stores, that were around.
They still exist.
And plumbing co-ops and construction co-ops. But this was also an era that unions hadn't been completely killed off yet. I mean, I came of age as Reagan, and believe me, the opportunities that my brother and I had, that my father had, both with the incredible shop training and stuff that was standard in education. Trades were taught in high school and junior high school, but also that there was more respect for unions. And then we get to the Reagan era and unions were vilified, cut down. How does this culturally also affect this idea of cooperatives and also respect for blue-collar work in an age where everybody wants to be a TikTok influencer or something?
Well, once again, it's a serious loss that the guild or the union, whichever way you want to carry that, is no longer existent. I have a personal affection for traditional tile setting. It's what I like to do with my hands. I can do the plumbing and I can do a variety of things. But I really like tile setting, and there was a serious guild and union-based stuff in LA around ceramic tile setting. I remember going, I think it was in the early 70s. I'd get in there and spend a couple of days in their libraries down there. It was a union hall, I think is really what it was. I think all that stuff's gone. And they were under, the unions in general, and guilds in particular, under great pressure to, they couldn't perform. The economic model didn't support them. Well, I think this is a problem of individuation, people taking their personal gain higher than their collective gain, and it's part of what I'm observing about the context that we're trying to function in now. There kind of is no collective model. The commons is a joke. Whether it's the commons in the trades or the commons in the world out there. The disparity of power and income in the culture right now aggravates all that stuff. I also think there are guys who follow the Bauhaus model. I know a little bit less about the real cultural drivers that supported the Bauhaus educational models. I, of course, know them as aesthetics, which is to say, commercially, regrettably, for better or worse, of these beautiful, austere, artistic stuff. But they came out of an educational context and a worker context, as I understand it. But I don't think that was that the actual product was the main driver of the movement. Now it's hard to say, and from our perspective, looking back on the Bauhaus, what we see are the big dogs, the famous ones who were producing all this wonderful semi-graphic art and really wonderful sculptural product. But it was as I understand it, it was originally architecturally driven. And I think it was, well, I can't really say. All I know is that it's a model that came out of a particular socioeconomic context, and I don't see it functioning. I don't see any analog functioning in my world right now. Whether that's all economically driven, which is how I carry it, or there's something about the aesthetic part of it, people's values. I don't know. They were proud of living in bedrooms that had a cot and a desk and a lamp. That was what they had in the room. I mean, just wonderful pictures of these heavyweight artists and the way they lived. And everything was, well, to the degree I can read through a picture, everything was elegantly refined and thoughtful and austere, as opposed to accumulative. Even in my place, I think I'm pretty austere. But I got book matched agate stone in countertops, and I got who would ever have a blue hardwood floor? I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
One of the things in my observation that I think complicates for co-ops, and especially when you're talking about working at a minimum wage and then sharing the profit of whatever you're making collectively, is the incredibly high cost of housing right now. That makes it very, very hard for somebody to put in the type of time to build a business, which I know from having built several practices over the years, or even when I played in bands, developing your audience, it doesn't happen in the first week.
Nope.
You better be ready to be struggling for at least a year, just to get your clients and stuff together. And I think in the meantime, when people are paying such an outrageous amount of money for housing, this seems to be complicating so much, including even just regular capitalist small businesses in their ability to survive. So how do we navigate as a co-op community these realities in the capitalist universe that we're trying to swim through?
I think it has to be, I don't want to say underwritten, because it's more than just the economics, but I think it has to be, I'll say underwritten, by the old guys. I think that's who's got a chance of being able to do it by belief and trying to allow something to grow with unremunerated energy and time being put in. It's the only thing I know. The other way is to live like poor students, right? And as long as people are young and they haven't complicated their life with 12 kids and played the game that way, if that's still in the realm of the possible, But I also feel like there's even in my limited experience of cooperatively aimed trades-related folks, I expected to walk into a group that was taking ongoing education seriously. That is to say, bearing down on their licensing, on their certifications, on their trade-related education. And I frankly got zero. Nothing of it. Nothing like that was happening. Now, maybe that I was too late in the organization, but there were real experience. As I was first sniffing around this stuff, there were a couple of major projects that were completing, and they were in the red by 6 figures. 6 fucking figures. Well, you would think this would wake folks up to the necessity of having decent management, and it was a failure of management. There was no management that I could see, at least in the sense that I carry it from my, bazillion years of building houses. So if folks aren't going to be continuing education and they're not driven by need, there's going to be nothing except short-term gain going to be driving any of these things. And you can, the more you simplify your life, the less you have to deal with meetings. I mean, meetings are well, once again, I have limited experience with the local cooperatives, but the meetings meant that you were either willing to take on like a 20% hit in your income, because that's how much of your time you're putting into it, basically, or you learn how to get a lot better, much more efficient and effective than the average guy out there, and you become more competitive in that regard. And I think it was just too hard. I think people couldn't do it. They just couldn't and wouldn't do it. I also think there's a way in which everybody felt they had to be intimately connected with kind of all decisions. Everything was discussed with too fine a grain, rather than, as one possibility, assigning roles and then checking in every month or 6 weeks and rolling the roles through. So I'm king of the hill for a year, you get to be king of the hill next year, and I'll, hand off my expertise as I can. I think that kind of thing avoids everybody having to be intimately connected with every detail, and yet not really having either the expertise or the history to be articulate and useful to the discussion. It's an interesting problem. It's a difference between power and expertise, and being able to having something to offer, or simply being able to manifest your shared power in the situation. I think both are important. I think emotionally they're surely important, but shared power without shared expertise will kill the situation.
One thing that I've run through my head and for some years now is co-op outreach for trades programs. Locally we have Laney College and stuff, because high schools and junior high schools are not featuring shop classes. Although I hear a couple rumors that a couple high schools are starting that again, because not everybody is designed to sit in front of a computer at a 90-degree angle day in, day out for their entire job. I mean, so if, what do you think of outreach? Because this still comes back to both cultural and how to support oneself in this high overhead universe as an organization, a cooperative organization, is built and finds its clients and establishes themselves.
When I first realized that I was ready to get out of the game, I saw part of it was the capitalization. I saw a bunch of stuff, tools and materials and trucks and all this stuff that accreted to me, I was dragging around me. And I knew there had to be some graceful way to make them productive in somebody else's situation. So first thing I did was go to Laney College and Diablo Valley College, both of which offer trade related. I say, no, I think if I recall correctly, DVC was much more in the architectural end. Laney had an actual trade school, and I found the guys there interesting, but they do what they do. And I am pretty certain that would be doing it in run around our not having anything like a Bauhaus movement. That is to find faculty at these two institutions or others that would either find aggressive, articulate, I think both these things are required, aggressive and articulate, trade-interested students who are ready to make something manifest from the get-go, as opposed to getting in the saddle somewhere and finding it too expensive to undo and change their way of doing work. I also think it might wind up being more likely and profitable to work from the engineering school, which is to say, might be up at UC or talking to one of those jokers who all the aggressive, interesting architecture I know of was always sort of cutting edge in engineering too. And this requires young people who are willing to put energy into stuff that doesn't pay off obviously right away. And that would mean associating with interesting, i.e. young, engineers. The political model, that is the cooperative mentality, is still a problem. And I think it's a problem we as a culture are going to be facing, no matter which end of this whole process which individual piece you pick up, it's always interconnected with 75 other pieces. You wind up with a whole mess. The whole mess comes up with you, right? And depending on which piece you pick up, you'll eventually get to every other piece. The engineering thing will definitely touch on interesting and alternate aspects of production, people who are interested in developing and refining their skill set. Usually this implies youth. Some of us manage to keep a kind of interested eye out or interested hand in or something, but that's less common. I think the schools means it also means that since the union isn't there and therefore the guild training isn't there, that leaves us with these local secondary and college level schools. That's what we got. I remember I was trying to, again through a local co-op, we had a couple of informal plan reading. I realized these guys didn't know how to read plans. I found it very disconcerting. And it was too late in the game to actually pay off. But we dragged a set of plans, usually a set of plans that was associated with projects they were actually building, and talked about how to read them, how to scale them, how to read what the meaning of these different sheets were, how the architectural and the engineering drawings interrelated, some of the shortcuts and nomenclature used to indicate structural elements. It was, it's something you can learn on your own, but it's really hard, really hard.
You think part of this is our 50-year history of just putting down blue collar or physical work. It just seems that this has been and I think this maybe goes to just how, the whole country's divided now, or it's just disrespect for manual labor. And it just seems that some people go into some trades just as a last resort until something better comes along, or maybe don't even have the support from their community or family for the work that they've chosen, because they want to work physically or want to work with their hands. And how much of culture doesn't understand how complicated much of this work is, and how skilled it is.
There was a period when building a house or building a building was regarded as one of the most complicated things you can do. And I think it's still the case. Now, the problem is no one feels like they're intimate with the process enough to call it that, but it's really true. It's very complicated stuff. If you include the original engineering and the eons old standard practices that are developed by terrible accident. I mean, most of the stuff that's part of code, every line of code is some tragedy. That's how it happened there. Something fell on somebody and killed them. And as a result, there's a code line. It is a fundamental disrespect for manual trades. I came to all this stuff through the arts. I was a professional dancer for 7 years when I first came west. And we didn't have a dime, and we needed a rehearsal space. So a couple of us got together and took these rented commercial spaces, woodworking spaces or whatever, and remodeled them, right? And one thing led to another, and the lighting designer got an electrical license, and I got a general building license based on the histories of the work itself. And my education would suggest I was going to do something else. Let's put it that way. My education, I should be a doctor, I guess.
What was your initial education?
I had a biochemistry degree from Oberlin College, and I did some graduate work when I came west in that case it was in photography, so up at Lone Mountain College, which is now part of UCSF, I guess. But the track I was on, as a result of Vietnam deferments, was pre-medical, Now, a lot of other things raise their ugly head, basically it was sex, I chased a different kind of energy, and the rest is history. Here I am in my kitchen. But yes, I have a beat on my microphone now. Yeah. So I don't know where were we?
Well, I think trying to figure out where do we go from here in order to revive the trades, and how, I don't know, perhaps younger people coming out of the trades could partner with perhaps an older person with a contract that is wanting to retire, and use it as a mentorship kind of thing, and eventually take over the...
I've been trying. I think I know a couple of older folks who have been trying to put together groups. I suspect that the real way, in my case, and I'm not sure I have the horsepower to do it, the emotional horsepower, is to take on a complicated job and hire, about a 50-50 neophyte experienced group, and use the project as a vehicle. Now, this means that I've got to have a client who's forgiving about the calendar, because this was not the fastest way to build. They'll have to be forgiving about certain kinds of quality expectations, although that should be more under control, maybe not. But that's not the shape of the world that I inhabit right now. It looks to me like people expect real performance and real adherence to deadlines and no nonsense. Now, it may be that that's just the clients who I've had in my group who have the money to pay for the kind of projects that I'm interested in doing, which are frankly complicated and interesting. And I built a house up in the hills that didn't have a right angle in it. It was 5,000 plus square feet of long curved masonry walls, and it was built on a hillside that had very aggressive downslope, and it was two buildings that were offset by that full 10-foot floor with a glass bridge in between and a lap pool at the bottom. And you look at it in plan view in this long tapered hourglass shape. I mean, it was wonderful, and it was a nightmare. It would be perfect for learning everything about everything, but it couldn't stretch. I mean, it was 2 years of sleepless nights and just driving like crazy and trying to make it happen. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I think it's the kind of job that gets people up to speed really fast, and mistakes are absolutely unforgivable. This unfortunate dance. The problem right now is competing in a more simple market where what you're really doing is sort of guts and feathers building and remodeling. Is you're competing with a lot of undocumented and unformally guys who aren't covered by the normal employment insurances and taxation and all that stuff. So the competitive model is pretty tough if you are. Well, it's one or the other. It looks to me there's like no middle ground that I can see. And the middle ground is really what would be required. Don't know what to say. I think the next 20 years are going to be very complicated, because I think this have and have not thing is going to make a bunch of very angry folks, first off, and a bunch of people in serious economic need. This smells to me like the early Mondragon experience. It's exactly what they were about. Utterly failed economy, post-war. I mean, it was a terrible scene. And the other thing that I hate to count on, but the Catholic Church and the respect that it had in the community had a part to play in how Arizmendi himself managed to pull this off. He had real respect from the community. I don't see organized religion as playing a very viable role right now in the world I inhabit. I could say that more strongly if you like. But it's, I don't see the analog. So right now, yes, I think the schools and, just talking to you now has maybe inspired me to go pay Laney and Alamo Valley College another visit. What's the harm? I didn't let go of these licenses for a reason. I mean, there was a period about 5 years ago when the smart thing was just to shut down, stop paying for my licensing and let it go. We'll see.
It'd be nice if pride came back into how we build. When I think of there's so much building going up, and yet there has been problems with buildings that are just 10 years old. The Irish students falling off of a balcony because the soffits hadn't been put in correctly, and there was dry rot. And stories about how the management, after the first year, there was no management. There was bugs in the... And,
this is all economic drivers. This is all about economic drivers.
Or the Millennium Tower in San Francisco. Here's this enormous thing, one of the most expensive places to live in the world. And it's becoming a leaning toward,
I don't
you know.
know the refinements of it. I mean, like if I wanted to go stir the pot, I could go find, I got colleagues who could tell me exactly what was going on, and they could probably put their hand on the fault. But in the case you're talking about over here with the balconies and all that stuff, this could have been, there are a half a dozen different players who could have identified that problem in the building process as it was going up and addressed it, from the inspectors all the way down to the actual mechanics who should know. But waterproofing details are one of those things. Everybody knows your ass is in a sling if you don't understand waterproofing and water guidance. It's like the main deal. I mean, from a safety standpoint and a longevity standpoint, whether it's tile setting or it's all about water guidance. And the simple notion of a flashing is, if you understand it fundamentally, then you understand many aspects of a building, from the very peak to the very footing and the crawl space protection and all the rest of it. I mean, I find that very satisfying. Well, I think the building world, the trades people are facing the same problem that it's a universal problem in our culture, which is to say the pressure's on to do the very most with the very least. And the model is one of acquisition, of sort of a greedy model. You try to get the most you can out of every transaction. And this is an automatic formula for getting you say that you want the most for the least, but you wind up getting the least for the most, because the whole world's trying hard to resist you in that. Everybody's trying to give you the least for the very most. Well, this is the formula for getting the shittiest for the most. And I think this is a universal thing, whether you're in the arts, or whether you're in the trades, or whether you're in other kinds of trades, automotive repair. I know there are more or less careful folks out there, and you're always grateful to run into somebody who's careful and you feel like has your interests shared with their own. And if I was to make an emotional case, it would be figure out how to share interests with your client, with your colleagues, with your employees, with your employer. Share caring.